Welcome back to my YouTube channel, CoinNexa Vault. What you are about to see in this video is going to completely rewire the way you think about the coins sitting in your car's cup holder, your kitchen junk drawer, or that old jar you haven't touched in years, because we are covering 4 coins today that prove, beyond any doubt, that ordinary American pocket change has been hiding extraordinary secrets in plain sight for decades, and I promise you, as this list goes on, each coin gets more dramatic, more historically charged, and more financially jaw-dropping than the one before it, so the absolute worst thing you can do right now is leave early, because the final coin on this list is the kind of discovery that makes grown collectors put their hands over their mouths in disbelief. Now, have you ever thought about how many coins pass through your hands in a single week? Coins you drop into tip jars, coins you toss into fountains, coins you leave sitting on store counters without a second glance. What if one of those moments was the moment you let a small fortune slip right through your fingers without even knowing it? Because that is exactly the kind of story we are talking about with the 1985 D Washington quarter, a coin that millions of Americans have spent, saved, ignored, and overlooked, and yet, in the right condition, with the right characteristics, in the hands of the right collector, this coin represents something far more valuable than its face value of 25 cents would ever suggest. The 1985 D Washington quarter was struck at the Denver Mint, identifiable by the small D mint mark sitting just to the right of Washington's ribbon on the obverse, and what makes this particular year and mint combination so compelling to serious numismatists is the combination of its mintage behavior, its die quality inconsistencies, and the extraordinary rarity of finding one in truly pristine, gem-quality condition after 4 decades of circulation. The Denver Mint in 1985 was running at high production volume, hundreds of millions of quarters were struck that year, and in high-volume production environments, die wear becomes a critical variable, meaning that the difference between a standard circulated 1985 D quarter and a superb gem uncirculated example certified by PCGS or NGC is not just a matter of condition, it is a matter of statistical near impossibility, because the odds of a coin surviving 4 decades in true mint state are vanishingly small. Collectors who specialize in Washington quarters, and there are dedicated, passionate collectors who have spent lifetimes and serious money assembling complete date and mint sets in the highest possible grades, will tell you that certain years and mint combinations create what they call condition rarities, meaning the coin itself was minted in large numbers but the survivors in top grades are so few that they effectively function as rare coins for grading tier purposes. The 1985 D is precisely that kind of coin, common in pocket change, extraordinarily rare in MS-67 or above. Now, collectors who have documented their finds with this coin have noted some fascinating characteristics that elevate certain specimens above the rest, among them, what appears to be strong die doubling on Washington's facial features and the lettering of Liberty, creating a subtle but unmistakable doubling effect that requires magnification to detect but that immediately separates that coin from every other 1985 D quarter in existence. There are also specimens documented with strike-through errors, where a foreign object, possibly a thread or a fragment of metal debris, was caught between the die and the planchet at the moment of striking, leaving a ghostly, unique impression that makes the coin completely one of a kind in the universe of numismatic history. Imagine the scene: a mint worker in Denver in 1985, running machines at full capacity, completely unaware that one specific coin coming off the press in that moment carries an error so subtle, so beautiful, and so rare that 40 years later a collector sitting in a well-lit room with a loupe press to their eye would look at it and feel their heartbeat quicken. That is the magic of error coins, and the 1985 D Washington quarter, in certain verified varieties, delivers exactly that magic. The hunting community around Washington quarters is deeply active. Coin roll hunters across the country spend hours pulling quarter rolls from bank vaults, searching face by face, year by year, mint mark by mint mark, and the 1985 D is always on the checklist because experienced hunters know that the gem survivors are still out there, still moving through banks and change machines and forgotten coin jars, waiting for someone with the knowledge to recognize them. In certified MS-67 or MS-68 condition, examples of the 1985 D Washington quarter have commanded prices at auction that would make anyone who casually spent one feel genuine, lasting regret, and the condition is everything here, which is the critical truth I want you to carry away from this coin. A 1985 D quarter in your pocket is worth 25 cents. But a 1985 D quarter certified by PCGS or NGC in the highest grades is a completely different object, operating in a completely different financial universe, and the only way to know which one you have is to look carefully, handle it by the edges, protect it from contact, and get it evaluated. Now, keep that idea in your mind, because the next coin is going to show you what happens when you take that same principle of condition rarity and layer it on top of a coin with even more historical weight, even more collector passion, and an even more dramatic story behind it. Stay with me, because we are just getting started. Next, 1973 Washington quarter, and I need you to understand something before we even talk about this coin's value, because the 1973 issue of the Washington quarter sits at a genuinely fascinating intersection of American monetary history that most people have never thought about, and once I explain it to you, the way you see this coin will never be the same. Think about 1973 for a moment. The United States had only 2 years earlier fully abandoned the gold standard under the Nixon administration's closing of the gold window in 1971, and American coinage was deep into its post-silver era, with quarters now struck in a copper-nickel-clad composition that replaced the 90% silver quarters that had circulated for decades before 1965. This means that 1973 quarters have no silver melt value, no precious metal content to fall back on. Their value is entirely dependent on rarity, condition, errors, and collector demand, which is actually what makes certain 1973 Washington quarters so electrifying to the serious numismatic community. The 1973 Washington quarter was produced at 3 facilities, Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, with the San Francisco issue being a proof-only coin not intended for general circulation, which immediately makes the collector landscape for this year more complex and more interesting than a casual observer would ever guess. The Philadelphia and Denver business strike issues were produced in enormous numbers, but here is the thing that collectors keep coming back to: the 1973 proof issues from San Francisco, particularly those with cameo and deep cameo designations, represent a tier of visual perfection that is breathtaking to look at in person, with frosted, mirror-like contrast between the raised design elements and the polished fields that makes them look less like coins and more like miniature works of art, carved from light itself. In terms of the business strikes, numismatists have catalogued a compelling range of die varieties for 1973 that elevate certain specimens far above the standard circulation example, including strong hub doubling on specific die marriages that creates clear, documentable doubling on Washington's I, the date numerals, and the word liberty in ways that are immediately recognizable once you know what to look for. There are also documented cases of 1973 Washington quarters with filled die errors, where grease or debris filled portions of the die, resulting in certain design details being partially or fully obliterated on the struck coin, creating an eerie, ghost-like appearance that makes the coin unmistakably different from every other 1973 quarter in existence. Collectors have described finding these error specimens in the most unlikely places: bulk rolls purchased from credit unions, estate sale coin jars, the collections of elderly relatives who simply saved coins without knowing why, accumulating over decades what turned out to be a treasure map in miniature. The grading curve for 1973 Washington quarters in high mint state is extraordinarily steep. The difference between MS-65 and MS-67 is not just 2 points on a scale, it is the difference between a coin worth a modest premium and a coin that draws aggressive bidding at major numismatic auction houses. Because the population of certified MS-67 and above specimens for certain 1973 varieties is counted not in thousands but in dozens, sometimes in single digits. The PCGS and NGC population reports for top-tier 1973 Washington quarters are the kind of reading that makes collectors wake up at night thinking about the specimens they haven't found yet, the rolls they haven't searched, the jars they haven't gone through. And the storytelling community around this coin is rich. There are accounts, passed through coin club meetings and online forums, of hunters who pulled a 1973 quarter from a roll and immediately felt that something was different about the strike quality, the luster, the way the light moved across the surface, and who sent it in for grading and received back a certification that changed the financial reality of that coin instantly and permanently. That is the power of knowledge applied to something most people treat as disposable, and the 1973 Washington quarter is one of the cleanest examples of that power in the entire Washington quarter series. As with all of these coins, and I want you to hold this thought because it applies to everything we're discussing today, the real value of any specific specimen depends entirely on its condition. Its grade is certified by a recognized third-party grading service like PCGS or NGC, and the presence of any documented errors or varieties that place it in a special category beyond the standard issue. A circulated 1973 quarter in your change is common. A certified, high-grade, error variety 1973 Washington quarter is a different conversation entirely. And speaking of different conversations, what's coming next is a coin from a completely different era, a completely different design tradition, and with a completely different level of collector intensity surrounding it, and I guarantee you that the moment I tell you about it, you will feel the stakes of this video rise in a very real and very exciting way. Do not go anywhere. Next, 1937 Buffalo Nickel, and right now, before we go a single sentence further, I want you to feel the weight of what it means to hold a coin that is nearly 90 years old, a coin that was circulating in the pockets of Americans during the Great Depression, a coin that passed through hands calloused from hard labor and hands trembling from uncertainty and hands reaching into empty pockets hoping for just enough. Because the 1937 Buffalo Nickel is not just a numismatic object, it is a living document of one of the most emotionally charged decades in American history, and that historical gravity is baked into its collector value in a way that purely modern coins simply cannot replicate. The Buffalo Nickel series, designed by the sculptor James Earl Fraser and first issued in 1913, was by 1937 approaching the end of its run. It would be replaced by the Jefferson nickel in 1938, and there is something deeply poignant and numismatically significant about a coin minted in the penultimate year of its own design's existence, carrying the full artistic heritage of Fraser's vision in what was essentially one of its final performances. The obverse features that iconic composite portrait of a Native American chief, believed to be drawn from three real individuals, Iron Tail, Two Moons, and John Big Tree, rendered with a dignity and realism that was genuinely radical for American coinage at the time, and the reverse features the great American bison standing on a flat plain, modeled in part after a famous buffalo named Black Diamond who lived at the Central Park Zoo. This design, now nearly 84 years into its legacy as a numismatic icon, is universally regarded as one of the most beautiful coin designs in American history, and in 1937 that design was being struck for the second to last time, which gives every 1937 Buffalo Nickel a kind of collector resonance that collectors feel in their bones. But the story of the 1937 Buffalo Nickel goes far beyond sentiment, because this year produced one of the most famous and celebrated error coins in the entire history of American numismatics, the 1937 three-legged Buffalo Nickel, a coin so extraordinary, so visually shocking, and so passionately sought by collectors that it has achieved a level of legendary status that very few American coins of any era can match. The three-legged error occurred at the Denver Mint when an overzealous mint worker used a grinding wheel to polish a damaged die, removing so much metal from the reverse that the buffalo's right front leg was effectively erased, leaving a bison that appears to be standing on only 3 legs. An error so dramatic and so visually obvious once you know what to look for that it stopped collectors dead in their tracks from the moment the first examples were discovered in circulation. Now, even setting aside the extraordinary 3-legged variety, standard 1937 buffalo nickels from all 3 mint facilities, Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, carry significant collector premiums in high grades, because the buffalo nickel design was notoriously difficult to strike with full detail, particularly the full horn of the buffalo on the reverse, which required a perfectly functioning die and precise striking pressure to render completely. A 1937 buffalo nickel with a full horn designation, meaning the buffalo's horn is crisply, completely defined with no weakness or flatness, is substantially rarer than a standard example and commands a meaningfully higher price at auction. Collectors who have built complete buffalo nickel sets in high grade, a pursuit that requires years, serious financial commitment, and extraordinary patience, will tell you that the 1937 issues are among the more approachable keys in the set for full horn examples, but that approachable is a relative term in the buffalo nickel world, and finding a truly full horn 1937 example with exceptional luster and eye appeal is still a genuinely exciting event when it happens. Imaginative storytelling has always surrounded this coin. Envision a Depression-era American, perhaps a farmer in the Dust Bowl, perhaps a factory worker in Cleveland, reaching into their pocket and pulling out a 1937 buffalo nickel, glancing at it without noticing the missing leg, spending it on a loaf of bread and moving on, never knowing that coin, had it survived undamaged and unspent, would one day be among the most sought-after 5-cent pieces in numismatic history. These are the moments that define what rare coins are really about, not just metal and design, but the extraordinary collision of human history, manufacturing accident, and the passage of time that creates something irreplaceable. And as always, the critical truth that applies here is this: the value of any 1937 buffalo nickel, whether standard issue or 3-legged variety, is entirely determined by its condition, the sharpness of its strike, the quality of its surfaces, and its certification by PCGS or NGC, because an uncertified coin is an unverified story, and in numismatics, the certification is what transforms a story into a fact that auction houses and collectors will pay serious money for. Hold on tight right now, because everything we have covered so far, the 1985 quarter, the 1973 quarter, the legendary 1937 buffalo nickel, has been leading to a moment, a coin, a piece of American history that stands in a category so elevated, so dramatic, and so historically extraordinary that the collectors who specialize in it describe their pursuit in terms that sound less like a hobby and more like a calling. The final coin is here, and it is everything I promised it would be. Next, 1928 buffalo nickel, and I need you to stop for one full second and appreciate what it means that we are about to discuss a coin that is nearly 100 years old, a coin that was minted when Calvin Coolidge was in the White House, when American prosperity was roaring at full volume just 1 year before the catastrophic stock market crash that would shatter that prosperity forever. When a nickel could buy a newspaper and a candy bar and still leave change, and when the men and women walking past the mint buildings in Philadelphia and Denver and San Francisco had absolutely no way of knowing that the coins rolling off those presses would one day be objects of burning, obsessive, life-altering collector desire. The 1928 buffalo nickel exists at one of the most emotionally loaded intersections in American history, the very peak of the Roaring Twenties, that extraordinary decade of jazz and excess and optimism that was living on borrowed time, and the coins from this year carry that energy, that electricity, that sense of a nation at the absolute height of its confidence, not yet knowing what was coming. James O. Fraser's design, now 15 years into its circulation life by 1928, had not lost a single ounce of its power. If anything, by 1928 the buffalo nickel had become so deeply embedded in American visual culture that people carried it without thinking. the way you carry breathing, the way you carry muscle memory. And that very familiarity is what caused so many 1928 examples to survive in lower grades, spent freely, circulated heavily, not preserved with any thought for the future. Which is precisely why high-grade 1928 Buffalo nickels are so extraordinarily scarce today and why the collector community pursues them with an intensity that borders on mania. The 1928 issue was produced at all three mint facilities, with the San Francisco's issue carrying particularly strong collector demand due to its lower mintage and the historical tendency of Western state coins from this era to have seen even heavier circulation than their Eastern counterparts. The 1928's Buffalo nickel in full horn, gem uncirculated condition, certified MS65 or above by PCGS or NGC, is the kind of coin that appears in specialized auction catalogs with extensive notes about its provenance, its visual characteristics, its rarity within the certified population, and its place in the broader narrative of the Buffalo nickel series. Collectors have documented a range of fascinating die varieties from the 1928 Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco issues, including double die obverse examples where Washington's portrait and date show clear, definitive doubling under magnification, as well as repunched mint mark varieties on the Denver and San Francisco issues where the mint mark was punched into the working die more than once, leaving a secondary impression that is unmistakable to trained eyes and electrifying to discover. There are also strike-through errors from 1928 that have been certified and sold at auction, coins where debris of various kinds was caught between the die and the planchet at the exact millisecond of striking, creating an anomaly on the coin's surface that is as unique as a fingerprint and as impossible to replicate as a snowflake. Imagine the collector, imagine a serious, dedicated numismatist who has spent 20 years assembling a complete Buffalo nickel set in gem condition, finally, after countless searches and failed auction bids and near misses, holding a certified 1928s in MS66 full horn, feeling the smooth edge of the slab between their fingers, tilting it under a light and watching the original mint luster roll across the surfaces in waves of golden light. That moment is not just financial, it is profoundly emotional, because it represents the closure of a chapter in a pursuit that has consumed years of their life. That is what rare coins do to people who truly understand them, and the 1928 Buffalo nickel, sitting at the edge of one of history's greatest economic precipices, struck in the final blaze of an era that was about to end forever, captures that emotional dimension better than almost any other coin in the entire 20th century American series. The historical storytelling around 1928 is endlessly rich. These coins were in pockets and cash registers and piggy banks and leather coin purses all through the collapse of 1929, all through the bank runs of the early 30s, carried by people who were desperately trying to hold on to what they had, and the specimens that survived that period in high grade did so almost by accident, tucked away by some private act of preservation whose original motivation we can no longer know, but whose result is a near-century-old coin that looks today as close to the day it was minted as anything surviving from that era possibly could. If you have Buffalo nickels anywhere in your possession, in a collection, in a jar, in an old wallet, in a box from an estate, the 1928 issue is one you treat with absolute reverence, one you handle by the edges only, one you take to a professional numismatist or send directly to PCGS or NGC for evaluation, because the difference between knowing and not knowing what you have is, in this case, a difference that can rewrite your financial reality. And that is the truth I want to leave you with as we close out today's video on Coin Nexa Vault. These coins are not just collectibles, they are compressed history, they are manufactured moments, they are tiny metal records of the lives of people who lived and worked and survived in an America that no longer exists, and the lucky few who find them in high grade, who recognize them for what they are, who take the steps to authenticate and certify and properly value them, those people discover that the past has been quietly, patiently holding a gift in trust for whoever was paying close enough attention to claim it. If this video showed you something today that you didn't know before, if it made you look at your spare change differently, if it sent you to check an old coin jar with new eyes, then do one thing for me right now: subscribe to Coin Vault, because this is just the beginning, and the coins we are covering next are going to make today's list look like the opening act.